don't buy into this lie that AI is going to supersede all human intelligence, because it is really an invitation to be led around by the nose. It's an invitation to stop thinking critically. It's an invitation to stop conceiving of greatness. It's an idea to stop having ideas and to having your intellect connect to a world beyond merely this one, to the idea of a creator. How could a finite creature even conceive of an infinite creator? That alone is a contradiction, but for the ability to go behind pure physical processes. You look at it.
He has a poor track record on fasting. He was once accused of using vulgar language, but he said the accusation was bullshit. He loves the smell of gasoline and burning oil around his motorcycles, and never stops drinking Coke Zero. He hasn't learned how to walk away from a fight. He's been to hell and back more than once, bringing a few public companies along for the ride. Other clergy scoff at him. The SEC and Big Pharma try to, quote, silence him for good. But their efforts haven't had the intended effect. That's Father Emmanuel.
Growing up in Tirana, where the call to a dawn echoed from the spiraling minarets, was a powerful experience for her. Albanians were forced to convert to Islam under Ottoman rule. In 1967, under the Marxist-Leninist regime, Albania became the world's first atheist state and destroyed churches to eradicate Christianity, in a land where St. Paul once preached the gospel. Her grandfather fought as a guerrilla fighter, and her father commanded a tank brigade. When communism collapsed, there was an insurrection against the state, leading to anarchy. Albanian women are known for their resilience. It is said they are born from the barrel of a gun. As a teenager, her father was flown out of the country without notice on a military helicopter to save his life. From then on, she started sleeping with an AK-47 next to her bed. That's Presbytera Theodora.
I think you want to have a maximum truth-seeking AI. This is very important. The AI should not be taught to lie. It should not be taught to say things that are not true. Even if those things are politically incorrect, it should still say say what it believes to be true.
Apple recently announced Apple Intelligence, its AI system, and plans to integrate AI across its devices and applications. Elon Musk criticized Apple Intelligence, alleging that the tool was a security risk, calling it, quote, woke nanny AI spyware. He says the AI he's building will be, quote, maximum truth-seeking. Musk also says that, quote, AI might be the most important question of all, and that the percentage of intelligence that is biological will be less than 1%. Will any AI or AGI be, quote, maximum truth-seeking?
Creation of more refined large language models using greater computational power, it does not change fundamentally what it is today. AI today is really starting to look like another Tower of Babel. People believe that somehow it will become super intelligence or AGI, artificial general intelligence, but what's in a name? Look at the name itself. It's artificial, and it will only ever be artificial. I think on some level, the proponents of artificial intelligence really want to believe that it's creating new life, but human beings don't get to create new life. We get to participate in the agency in life according to God's will. But the spark of life itself, we don't understand, much less can we create it. And there certainly is no life in artificial intelligence. In fact, artificial intelligence doesn't even have consciousness, much less self-consciousness. And it does not have a soul. So the idea that a soulless, lifeless piece of software, granted a very sophisticated piece of software, will somehow be able to seek truth. Truth is a singular principle. Truth is God. Christ says, I am the truth, the way, and the life. To think that some massive piece of software code, some complex algorithm, which runs on a loop and ascertains information by comparing objects one-to-one, will somehow be able to do something as magnificent as transcend itself, the finite boundaries of itself, to ascertain the infinite. Truth is an infinite principle at the end of the day. When you stumble upon the truth, there is no your truth, my truth, there is a truth, and it is an infinite principle. Even in mathematics, you understand that you cannot have a infinite principle predicated on finite points, but rather finite points must be predicated on an infinite principle. Not unlike that, we see human creation being extraordinarily finite, and yet the human mind in its magnificence can contemplate the infinite. That alone should be a shocking revelation to everybody. AI will never, no matter how powerful the computational process becomes, will never be able to ever ask the question about it, who created it or why it was created. Now, it can create a synthetic version of an answer that sounds impressive, but it will never be anything even close to approximating true self-awareness. Now, when we think about consciousness, it separates what is alive from what is aware. And then we look at awareness, and we look at awareness of awareness, which is self-awareness. And there could even be an awareness of self-awareness like we're discussing now. The idea that, again, something that we create as humans will ever be able to approximate that is simply wrong. And it will be wrong for all places and all time in the future. I read the other day that NVIDIA had increased Moore's law by multitudes of what they thought they could do in the 60s. So in the 60s, they thought every 2 years they would be able to increase the number of transistors etched into a circuit board, basically doubling it every 2 years. I read that NVIDIA had increased it 1,000-fold in 8 years. That's remarkable. But at the end of the day, it's still just a circuit board, a silicon circuit board with transistors embedded. There has been absolutely no qualitative improvement in the functioning of those computations. We're talking about binary code, a series of switches on and off that feed a software program. It's no different than the gigantic machines we saw that had glass tubes in them in the 1950s or 1960s. It's only gone thinner, smaller, and lighter. And to the extent that we believe as human beings that we can displace God at the center of the universe, if we start to think that, then it's no surprise that we see Elon Musk wearing a Baphomet suit with this abomination that is half man, half animal, male and female, because at the end of the day, megalomania is the only way to make occultism work. And history is replete with people who had great power, and they felt and believed they drew that power from the occult. And where this is heading is extremely disturbing, because to think that we can impart that life, that we can impart this sort of reaching beyond ourselves to create, really places us in the position of God. And when we do that, we become like the worst of the fallen angels. We have the propensity to become that which is absolutely demonic. And when you look at the person who actually created this image that Musk wears so proudly on this outfit and it wasn't a one-off, right? He didn't just wear it and, oh, that was a mistake. It was thoughtless. I shouldn't have done that. This is his avatar and acts where hundreds of millions of people can see it. But if you look at the man who actually created that image, his name was Eliphaz. And he went, actually, perhaps unsurprisingly, had thought originally to be a priest. He sought to study in a seminary. He was Catholic, and he wanted to serve the Lord. But he fell away from that, Eliphaz Levi, and he began to become a magician and to go deeper and deeper into the occult. And by the time he was 40, he'd written 20 books on the occult. The man had really become completely demonic. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, he was really a Marxist and a socialist because he thought that the occult would lead to a perfect social order. And if you think about what's happening today with AI, if you buy into this lie that artificial intelligence is going to be some sort of super intelligence that can be smarter than men and smarter than creation, then you're going to be led around by the nose, because what it's going to do is it's going to wipe out the ability of an entire generation of people to think for themselves. They'll depend on it as if it really was truly more intelligent than they were, and it's not. The reality is that they'll stop thinking. They'll stop abstracting concepts, because the idea that an algorithm can parse out data and make one-to-one comparisons between objects and come to a conclusion about the next step of something. This sort of reasoning, even if you place a large language model over images for validation, you're really just using inductive reasoning, which is prone absolutely to fallacy. It is to say that one conclusion at one point and one time will always result in the same conclusion every point and every time, which is a complete logical fallacy. Human beings, on the other hand, do something incredibly different. They abstract. They conceive of something. They create seemingly out of nothing. They can find connections between disparate pieces of data and information and conceive a solution that no computer would ever think of. And it never could, because it couldn't be trained, because there's no discernible connection between those things. And if you look at the history of really the great milestones that people have overcome in great moments of eureka where they invent something, it's almost always marked by that moment of serendipitous discovery. And so not only can an algorithm not have that sense of serendipity, that sense of abstraction, that sense of a concept, it will never really have the ability to go beyond physical processes. So where you can see some linear regression in comparisons that could have a physical analog, give me a physical analog for a concept which could contain many objects. Two different images will conflict. That works really good if you were trying to build software for self-driving automobiles, but you can have multiple concepts that don't conflict. In fact, most concepts don't conflict because they are greater, fundamentally greater than the The idea that the human mind has a predicate, you see this even in a child. A child, one of its first words it ever speaks is dada or daddy. The Aramaic equivalent is Abba, the word that Christ and St. Paul used to describe this relationship of intimacy with the Father. That shouldn't be a coincidence. The child has a concept, it has a predicate, it has a notion of Father in its mind. It has a concept of what it is applying the word to. So language in the child's mind already has this sort of foregriff, this sort of foreknowledge. That's really quite remarkable because a computer can never have a forenotion of anything. It can only be trained by looking at pattern recognition and looking at images and content which already pre-exists. And in the case of Musk, it is perhaps unsurprising that this gentleman had a conflict with his own father, apparently, which is unfortunate. It's not surprising me that maybe this man thinks that the person who should have been the most reliable, the most benevolent, the most important authority figure in his life, there was a great disappointment. But instead of growing beyond that to understand there's a moral authority, there is such thing that is greater than a biological father, that there is such thing as a spiritual father, there is such thing as a father in heaven. What does he do? He makes the mistake of so many others with great wealth and great power. He begins to place himself in the position of absolute moral authority, such that he can always in perpetuity reject a moral authority outside of himself. And this is incredibly dangerous because it does lead to the occult. You can say it was just an outfit, it was just play. But I don't think so. I think if you allow people long enough, if you allow them enough time and you watch carefully and you listen to them carefully, they will tell you who they are and what they believe. And so this lie is incredibly important. The lie that AI is going to displace all human thought is absolutely a ridiculous one. And I think that we need to be very conscientious of what it's leading to, because I don't think it's a coincidence that Eliphas Levi was interested in perfect social order, because if you have a generation of people who can't think for themselves, who become so reliant on AI that they stop making abstractions, they stop making connections, abstract connections and concepts and creating intellectually, then you have an entire society which can be controlled. And if you have a few people with an enormous amount of power and an enormous amount of wealth and a whole lot of people who cannot think for themselves or have been told that they cannot think for themselves, then you have a formula for absolute disaster. You have a formula for every evil that we've seen already in the 20th century set to repeat itself in the 21st century. And I would say, tell me this, how can an algorithm conceive of faith? Faith has no physical process associated with it. How can an algorithm conceive of prayer? Prayer has absolutely no physical mechanism associated with it. If you really think that all intelligence can be distilled down to just physical processes, whether it's in gray matter in the brain between neurons or whether it's between transistors etched in a circuit board and a piece of silicon, that is absolutely false. And you have to be able to let the scales fall from your eyes such that you will see the vertical lines of code streaming on your computer screen, because that's really what it is.